What does the government of Somaliland have?
Okay, let me repeat the question.
What
What specific initiatives is the Somaliland government, under your auspices as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, undertaking to increase presence in the United Nations and other centers of power around the world?
Well, thank you very much. So Somaliland is engaging in all countries around the world without any exception. Somaliland would like to tell to the world that we in fact has a lot to offer. Somaliland is welcoming anybody who would like to do that. Well, you probably know that since Somaliland showed its tranquility, its peace, it is a lot of countries around the world showed interest and invested in Somaliland. DP World is one of them. It invests $440 million. BII, which is another European country, a British company, invests also $320 million in 3 African ports. So what Somaliland is doing is to engage with all the countries. As long as these countries do not have any strings attached to the sovereignty of Somaliland and the existence of Somaliland, Somaliland is ready to engage and have and acquire more and more friends on a daily basis.
Question number 2. How can the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation strengthen engagement with the Somaliland diasporas in the United States and other influential countries?
That each and every one of you, wherever you are, become the ambassadors of Somaliland. A mission and an office somewhere around the world in Somaliland is not going to do what we want and where we want to go and what we want to achieve. Somaliland, each one of you guys, get and girls, of course, women, lady first. Gebigin, haddii aydan gacanta isqabsan oo aydan command post waa mission kanoo kale. Mission command post aydan ku xirmin oo aydan ismaamurin oo aydan samaysan communities adag. I want to engage with each one of the community across the world. We know what a strong community has done in UK. You know, in a flock, because the community was so strong. Because community in the UK, the community in the UK, showed that with their votes, they can actually influence the member of parliament. And that's very important. In America, and in Canada as well, what I'd like you to do is to go and talk to your representative. Go and contribute to the funds of their elections. And in Bakihoran, ama Rodono Bakihoran Lochi, waxbay ka tahaysaa qoyska Soomaaliya. Inaan isku imaan maalin keliya. Maalin keliya isu noqon saacad tumada waa useless. Wax waan noqonaa. Dagaalkii hore wuu soo dhamaaday. Imika waa kii diblomaasiyadda, waa kii xiriirka adduunyada. Waa inaynu geligeen xil saartaan. Waa inaynu madax iyo miijo yeelataan. Waa in aynu yeelataan meel aynu ka duushaan oo ah safaaradda, laakiin waa inaynu yeelataan at the same time strong community centers. Ha iska hor imanina. Haddaynu iska hor timaadaanna intay israaci kartaa ha israaco. Very important. Markaasoo keliya ayaynu meel gaari karnaa. Waana ku celiya had iyo jeer aqoonsiga Somaliland. Muuse bixi jeebkiisa kuma jiro, Ciise bixi jeebkiisa kuma jiro, Professor Smith jeebkiisa kuma jiro. Jeebkiina dadka codaynaya ku jiraan. Voting power. Chile. han noqonina dad uun meel iska fadhiyo marka maalin badiyo wax ka maqlaan jibooda mar walbaba dalkiina u soo jeeda do it and we can succeed.
Very good. Very good. I would add one item, stress something that the minister said, which I agree with him very strong. Participate in campaigns in the United States, in Canada, wherever you are. But I would like to emphasize that in or not that Hafiz Kula Mesha Idigini, Hafiz Ben Washington Kula. Hafiz Kawana Targetan. Hafiz he has underscored this. Haddaydan Hafiizka taageerin iyo Bashiir iyo kuwa Bashiir ka dambayn doona haddaydan taageerin dee waxbay noo socon maayaan. Questions now to the ambassador.
Can I add one thing to that?
Okay.
Very important point. As good an ambassador as Bashir is, the real ambassadors of Somaliland are you guys. Because most Americans, we all know, most Americans have never heard of Somaliland. So it's your responsibility to carry the flag of your country and talk up your issues and your priorities to the American public.
I'm going to add very briefly to that. My focus is writing, and what I would argue is that debating people online is a complete and utter waste of time. All the energy should be focused, write letters to the editors, submit op-eds, not to Somalia or Somalilander publications, but to American publications to build up that awareness and momentum.
One question for, I think I will only on the ambassador for a minute, but Dr. Ruben, an important question to you from the network. Please. Here's the question from Dr. Ruben. It seems that Somaliland has good relations with the United States conservative organizations and members of the Republican Party. The question is, what can Somaliland do, and it is leaders and mission, to build better relations with the Biden administration and the Democratic Party?
Okay, that's a great question because support for Somaliland has to be bipartisan. Happily it is. While there may be an impression that conservative organizations have been more sympathetic, there's two reasons for this. One, we're out of power right now, and so we're freer to speak, but that doesn't mean that my colleagues on the left aren't as sympathetic. Second of all, when it came to the congressional delegation, it may have skewed much more toward the Republicans, but that had nothing to do with Somaliland itself. It had to do with some of the domestic Democratic concerns with regard to COVID, but many of the Democratic staffers were just as interested, and I suspect that there's going to be more bipartisan delegations in the months and in the years to come, that I don't see this as a problem right now because behind the scenes, the appearance of partisanship doesn't reflect the reality, and the fact is that you have a bipartisan groundswell for Somaliland.
Ambassador Nash, what can you suggest, given your experience, that the Somaliland government can do to lobby and build cordial relations with countries in the African Union?
Wow. that is a tough one. You know, I represent the United States of America when I was as a diplomat and when I was Assistant Secretary, not the African Union. The African Union is going to be a tough sell, I'll be honest with you. Because you look at the history of the African Union, and they're not very easy to make dramatic changes. I mean, you look at the history, what happened with South Sudan. You know, everybody was in favor of South Sudan. It was going to be a country that was going to absolutely succeed. And look at the tragedy, what happened. A good case, though, was Eritrea. You know, think what you want about President Isaias and you know, what we call the North Korea of Africa. But that separation from Ethiopia went very smoothly because you had two leaders and both of them wanted to be the leader of a big country. So Isaias said, I'm out of here. But the vote was in support of Eritrea leaving, both inside Ethiopia and obviously within Eritrea. So if I was the leadership of Somaliland, I would work, first of all, more towards other places, because I can promise you, and I heard this myself when I was ambassador, there are a number of African countries that are today prepared to recognize Somaliland if they're the second country to do so. Yeah, but the problem for you guys is getting that first country, which is, you know, recognized and has a certain amount of influence. So that's where you work, and it has to be step by step. But I tell you, there's a whole lot of countries in the world that today would extend recognition if they were they would be fighting to be the second country to recognize.
Yeah, very good. Everybody wants to be second, but we don't have any first. Very good. I think before we go to the floor, if we have time, I would like to call on the minister also to say a few words.
Well, I'd like to answer the same question. First of all, you know that Somaliland has a legal argument and moral argument better than Kosovo, better than other countries. You know, the African Union came for a fact finding in 2005 and found that Somaliland has a legitimate case. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Going to African countries and spending our time with African countries will not cut it. What America has to do is talk on our behalf to the African countries they have influence. And then obviously every other country will follow. But America, who cares for democracy, who cares for stability, who cares for that strategic position that Somaliland has to lead this and talk to their country in Africa, their influence, and ask them to recognize Somaliland. And that's how the first African country will recognize Somaliland, but it has to be started. America has to push for that. Thank you.
Somaliland's strategic location makes it an important ally of the United States and deserves to be recognized without a delay. Second, as written yesterday, Chinese envoy to Somalia landed in Mogadishu and handed over the first shipment of arms to Somalia. Isn't it time for the United States and the West to provide defensive weapons to Somaliland to counter Chinese threat and destabilization in the Horn of Africa? Thank you.
I'll start and then the other people can. Number one. Let's talk about the arms. When I first got into my job as assistant secretary, I sat down with the people that were an expert on the events in Somalia, and I said, so tell me, how many troops are there in the Somali National Army? And they gave me the number. And then I said, how many troops are there in the various federal member state militias? They gave me the number. I said, how many troops are there in Amazon? They gave me the number. And then I said, how many armed people are in Al-Shabaab? They gave me the number. And I said, you know, looking at the numbers, this should be over in one afternoon. The forces on that side were so much greater than the forces on that side. So number one, if I was living in Somaliland, I would not worry about arms. I'm more concerned with motivation. We see what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. We see what happens when a much larger force with modern weapons faces a smaller force that is motivated and fighting for their home country. And so that I would not worry about as much. I think that's a side issue. The first part of the question is the most important one. Of course, Somaliland is extremely strategically important. And of course, the United States of America should be looking at alternatives to Djibouti, because you never know how it will go in Djibouti. I mean, following events We had a problem with some of our military aircraft landing in Djibouti, and the Chinese were shooting lasers into the eyes of the pilots. I don't know how many of you people are pilots, but it's not a good way to land an airplane when someone is shooting a laser in your eyes. So, of course, strategically it's vitally important, and that's one of the big selling points that Somaliland needs to be pursuing.
I would just say very briefly, to the first question, yes. And to the second question, and yes, and the United States needs to be proactive rather than reactive in this case for the reasons the ambassador had mentioned. With regard to the second question, yes, Somaliland should have the means to defend itself and should be enabled to have those means. That goes beyond simply hardware, however. There's a lot of other steps that can also be taken. For example, helping subsidize military training courses in other African countries to increase interoperability and to integrate Somaliland further into the African system.
One last.
People say we want China. The reason they want China because China built this stuff, but America they say they don't build it. So if you guys come, are you gonna build our country? Are you gonna do the build and give us stuff? But we never think.
A very important question hidden in that statement. Yeah. And the important question is that the reputation of the People's Republic of China in the continent and outside of the continent is that they are known to build concrete things, whether it's airports or ports or roads or bridges. The United States, so the question implies, doesn't do so. Yeah. So if the United States wants to have influence in Somaliland and build that relationship to a greater level, you will have to help us build the country. That's the question.
Here's my response to that. You know, I traveled, I wanted to visit all of the 48 countries I was responsible for. Because of COVID, I only made it to 32. But in place after place, I got the same thing. I said, well, you know, here's this wonderful stadium that the Chinese built for us. What have you done? I said, you know something? That stadium would not have people in it. That stadium would have a huge cemetery next to it with dead bodies in it if the United States of America did not save Africa from HIV/AIDS through PEPFAR, through the $100 billion that we have given to African health systems since the year 2000. So, you know, the United States of America invests in Africans. China builds stuff and they get paid for it. We invest in Africans because we want Africa to be the continent of the 21st century. So that's the answer.
سؤال كله أيها الأخوة تتقال إني كيف كريان وأنا قبل ما قد يقصون على البرنامج اللي يجرين سؤال شاسي وحوية إن هدي أنو كهذا نحكي سياسة يصير مركوب مقيين وصواها يقوم مقيين أنو كهذا إنه نريد legislative بالو بهاي هاي change كلو بدل بالو بهاي يصير الله political process كلو سكريو دولة إن هذا سديد يطول دمرة أما منستر ما حقنا هنا يجران أنت أساس الأسرة سؤال قبا وحوية جامعته إنه مركب الصوب حيو وهذا الكيس مقلال وما شاء الله جامعته كصور بحي إن حفيسي الدولة مركب تقنا ديسمبر بنا نقول هالكيس حفيسي بدل ما تجي in majority مركب شودا. Okay, we all understand unemployment for the kind overall you know very high وتذكر شغلان توسيدة ده أيوة نقطة. هذا سؤال الدنيا وسير شغل والبينة ودي هذا واحد لغة افتيمين كتو وهو يمكن شغالها القرية وساردها يمكن مريكنا قرية دون كهرباء مريك always well you know certain number of women certain number of minority you know diverse workforce لهذا البرنامج ده بتر دولة عليهم سلام إنشور قرية شغالها يمدح every level وساردها أي دور كشران يمانجوا سؤال الدنيا وسشورينا ويديو دولتنا ملاذ هاي أمام كفر كرسة برنامجنا نوعاسة أو إن تمرك فرصة بدل السيو وساعدها بدها السي يعني ولا كسر السيو ما هاي اللي يراهون صعب لا جري الباب كويدون فرينه ده هلوي ما دنا لين كوا كتير أنا امتحان كوا قاتين that is not enough وإن سي ولا كسر تمرك وشقية دولة اللوبة ديو برنامج عن كاس مشرا وسشكر أمام لقى فكرية ما مقولة هاي فكرة في عن هاي اللوبة هاي
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم and run ahaantii specific la oranayo sida halkan oo kale dumarku waa inay intaa yeeshaan minority waa inay intaa yeeshaan kaas waynu kaanaha laakiin waxa weeyaan in la siiyo opportunity hawlaha waqti kastaba dawladda way ka go'aantay waqti kastaba way ka go'aantay waqti kastaba waxa la eegayaa marka aad eegto wasaarad walba ina department walba inta ila departmentada waxa laga yaabaa inay wasaaraddaas leedahay 6 ama 7 department inay at least markay ugu yar tahay laba ay departmenadaas ay hadgareynayaan ama ay iyagu madax ka yimaadaan waa dawladdu ku dadaashay iyaga iyo markaad eegto dadka naafada iyo ama dadka kale laga tirada badan yahay intaa waa la eegayaa inay dawladda siday ugu jiraan iyo structure waliba sanadahan dambe way sii kordhaysay halka jaamacadahan idin iftiiminaya waa run hablo badan baa ka soo baxa waa sanadkan 21kii markii study la sameeyay Somaliland Hargeysa University lagu sameeyay waa markii ugu horeysay ee habluhu inamada dhaafeen when it comes Hargeysa University oo ay noqdeen habluhuna 51% inamadina 49% noqdeen halkaa waxaad ka arkaysaa opportunity-ga hablaha la siiyey waalidkii baa siiyey waxa siiyey iskuuladii baa siiyey oo dawladdii baa siisay jaamacadihii baa siiyey marka dadaalka dumarku inay hore u soo maraan hore u soo kacaan dadaal yar maaha waxa kaliya oo aanu imika halkaa markaanu marayno dib aanu is eegno waxa noo harsan oo aad arkaysaan waxa weeye tallaabada ku sii xigtay oo ah hablahaas oo dhani inay workforce galaan waanay ku jiraan runtii iyagoo kaliya maaha hablahaas oo kaliya maaha dee waddanka markaynu workforce ka hadlayno dee dumarka Somaliland number 1 ka yihiin number 1 in taxpayers bay yihiin taxpayers-ka ugu horeeya waa iyaga suuqay fadhiyaan taxpayers-ka weeye ganacsiga bay ku jiraan taxpayers weeye waxaana yihiin xafiisyadiina waa ku aynoo jooga marka meel xun ma joogno aanu imaka nidhaana amaanu cabanno ma joogno meesha kaliya aanu doonayna inaanu target garayna ma gaadhnaan waxa weeyaan labada house inaanu galno oo aanu dee represent garayno majority of the people oo ah of Somaliland people oo ah dumar
Samia, as a political advocate in the United States, what is your advice to Somalilander women who are interested in joining the political process in the U.S.?
Yes, that's the question.
horta haddaynu Mareykan joogno iyada lafteedu dhibaatadaasi kama maqna oo woman representation weli lama gaadhin waad aragteen markay Clinton ay araraysay Hillary Clinton iyo dhibaatadii ka soo gaadhay they were not able to break that glass ceiling to have a president for the United States of America laakiin waxaa jira gobollo sida Nevada oo kale oo 60% housekeedu uu haysto dumar representative-kooda ay yihiin 60% haddaad eegto Rwanda right waxa weeyaan more than 60% ma garanaysaa marka half of their marka inaku imika runtii haddii aan ku noqdo wasiir Shukri waxaa jira 18 ayaa dumara ayaa dictator loo magacaabay marka politics have to be reflective politics siyaasaddu waa muraayad la iska dhex arko haddii 8 iyo 10 dumara ay matalayaan oo dictator loo magacaabay populationka hooyooyinka iyo hablaha iskuulada ku jira half of the sky half 50% ayay matalayaan 18 marka waxaan oran lahaa qalinka ha lagu duugo in ka badan haddii powerkaasi uu hayo legislative branch hadduu hayo powerka haddii dhibaatadana ay dhibaato jirta ah wasiiradu markay wax magacaabayaan madaxweynuhu markuu magacaabayo taas lafteedu waxbay noo tari kartaa laakiin inta taa la gaadhay haddaan Mareykan ku soo noqdo ta Mareykan haddaynu doonayno inay hablahani horta hablaha aad baa lagu baahanaya siyaasadda galaan caqabadaadka ka jirta Somaliland halkaa kama jirto waxa weeyaan halkan waxa jirta organizationo ay dumarku la xiriiri karayaan waxa ka mid ah Run Vote Lead waa organization Emily List waa another organization waxa jira organization badan She Should Lead or She Should Run well that's another organization organizationas waxay qabtaan inay dumarka ay recruit gareeyaan dumarka ay campaignkooda dhisaan in training la siiyo how to run in lacagtii laga shubo in fundraising campaign loo sameeyo oo weliba la baro donorska big donorska ah ee dumarka doonaya in ay legislative pledge ka galaan dumarku sida keliya ay u noqon karayaan waxa weeyaan in ay fadhiistaan meesha qaanuunka iyaga ku saabsan lagu qorayo South Africa markii ay sameynayeen disability movement slogan baa jiray Nothing about us without us is for us Nothing about us without us is for us marka haddii la doonayo in maanta markii waxa la isku qabsan jiray saami qaybsigii maanta dumarkii baa saami qaybsigeeda ku haysta
dadka qaar baa su-aalay soo gudbiyey I think intooda su-aalaha inta badan waan su-aalay su-aasha ugu dambeeyaan doonayaa Mr. Shukri iyo Saamiyaba inaan weydiiyo kabacdina 3 su-aalood baynu ka qaadanayna dadkayna dhegeysanaya waliba anagoo mayka hablaha u badanaya 3 in lagu filnaan weydaan waan kasii badin doonaa su-aasheeda ugu dambeysa Mr. Shukri waxa weeye haddii aan ku weydiiyo challenge-ka ugu adag ee shaqadaada ku saabsan eed wajahdo wax keliya aan ku dhahda ii sheeg Minister Shukri maxaad oran lahayd
inaan ka dhaadhiciyo ummadda Somaliland inay cimiladii isbedeshay oo ay ku kala galaan cimilada ay isbedeshay siday ula jaan qaadi lahaayeen
Samia, what is the most challenging aspect of your career?
The most challenging aspect of my career waxa weeyaan inay dadku arkaan potentialkooda haddaad adigu potentialkaaga arki weydo waadagta inuu qofka lagu tuso marka runtii waxa weeyaan inagu haddaynu dumarka Mareykan jooga aynu ku soo noqono oo maanta delegation saa u weyn uu inoo yimaado challenge-keenu xitaa waxa weeyaan dumar ahaan sidee baynu u gudbin karnaa waxyaalaha dareenkeena ah aynu doonayno in wax nalagala qabto marka anigoo codkiina isticmaalaya waxaan doonayaa maanta wasiir Qeybta la jooga inaan message-ka u gudbiyo haddii dawladdu ay doonayso in Somaliland halkan vote-kooda ay isticmaalaan oo dumarku waliba aad u isticmaalaan waxaa loo baahan yahay in mission-kayga la support gareeyo waxaa loo baahan yahay mission-kayga la dhiso in loo qoro qof dumara oo community engagement ka shaqeysa oo dadka dhex gasha oo roolkooda ay noqoto in la tiro koobo Mareykan inta qof ay joogta in aynu samayno voter engagement voter registration voter empowerment oo aynu ogaano inta qof ay codeeyay haddaanad codeynin lama fadhiisan kartid xildhibaan all politics is local be somebody in your zip code markaasaad wax qaban kartaa but how many of us go to school board meetings how many of us go to city council meetings how many of us are engaged in our zip code marka siday taasi u dhacdo waxay ka imanaysaa in community empowerment la sameeyo community empowerment iskama dhacdo without a person who is leading that job marka Bashir God our ambassador he is doing a lot we need support for our mission thank you
Samia aad baa umahadsan tahay Samia halkeedii waxaa kaloo doonaya inaan sii raaciyo midin xasuusiyo kelmad uu wasiirka qaarkeedenu uu yidhi qof walba Somaliland ba ambassador baa tahay wadankaaga matashaa ambassador aad tahay markaad shaqada joogto markaad iskuulka joogto markaad carruurtaada iskuulkooda activities ka qayb galayso you represent Somaliland midda kalena waxa weeye Somaliland Americans baa nahay This is our home as well. In qaar badan halkan jooga, qaar badan baa halkan ku dhashay, noloshooda inta badan halkan ku noolaa. You have to be involved to make a difference for your country and degannahay iyo waddankeeniba. So you are an ambassador, each and every one of us in this room, ambassador of Somaliland. Please keep that in mind. So,
hablaha haddii labada hablood ee hareeraha fadhiya haddii aan toodaa wax ku daro run ahaantii unity-gunba waa kii inoo sheegaya wasiirkuna unity-ga wax ku noqonaysa unity-ga runtii wax ku noqonaysa haddaad doonaysaan inaad Somaliland runtii wuxuu tartaan hore ugu tartee maaliya habeen weydinkaa diraya maaliya habeen weydinkaana barbar taagan runtii idinkoo ku mahadsan waxa kaliya aan idinkula dardaarmaya waxa weeyaan soo gala politicalka Mareynkanka waa in Somaliland dariska laga helaa dad ku jira dee labadan hawsi halkan oo annaguna dee nidhaahno waana loo ku jira dee meeshii marka bal ku dhiirada habla iyo inamaba rag iyo dumar bal ku dhiirada dee siyaasadda waddankan mar haddaa ku jirtaan oo waddankii joogtaan oo carruurihii inoogu koriseen oo ku dhasheen dee waxa la doonayaa inaad idinkuna kan mid noqotaan oo soo gashaan si aanu idinku diirsanaan waana loo ku jiraa